He stepped out of the flooded forest alone, thin as bone, covered in scars and barely able to stand. No collar, no handler. Just a wounded German shepherd blocking a retired Navy SEAL's truck in the middle of a deadly storm. Most people would have driven around him. Nathan Rourke stopped. The dog didn't bark. He didn't beg. He only stared into Nathan's eyes, turned toward Blackstone Ridge, and limped into the rain. What Ranger led him to would uncover a missing woman, a buried injustice, and a mission far greater than any command he had ever followed. But before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Leave your city or country in the comments, and subscribe for more unforgettable Navy SEAL and K-9 stories. The rain had been falling over Cedar Vale for 3 days without mercy. It came down in cold, slanting sheets, hammering the roofs of the mountain town, filling roadside ditches until they overflowed, and turning every trail along Blackstone Ridge into a moving vein of mud. By late afternoon, the mountains had vanished behind a wall of gray mist. Water rushed beneath the trees with a force that made the forest sound alive, restless and angry. Nathan Rourke drove his old dark green pickup slowly along Millstone Road, both hands steady on the wheel. At 50, Nathan still carried the broad shoulders and disciplined posture of the senior chief he had once been, though 22 years in the U.S. Navy SEALs had left their marks on him. His face was angular and weathered, framed by short salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed gray beard. Faint scars crossed the backs of both hands, and an old injury in his right knee sent a dull ache through his leg whenever the weather turned cold and wet. He wore a dark blue flannel shirt beneath a faded brown canvas jacket, worn jeans, waterproof leather boots, and an old military watch that had survived more operations than he cared to remember. Nathan lived alone outside Cedar Vale, repairing generators, small boat engines, and emergency equipment for people who rarely asked where he had learned to remain calm when everything around him was breaking. He preferred it that way. Praise made him uncomfortable. Questions about his military past made him silent. Dogs, especially working dogs, made him remember things he had spent years trying not to revisit. The windshield wipers fought to clear the glass as he approached a narrow bend below Blackstone Ridge. The road ahead had partly disappeared beneath shallow brown water. Branches floated across the pavement, and stones loosened by the rain had rolled down from the slope. Nathan eased his foot off the accelerator. His instincts told him the road would not remain open much longer. He should have turned back. Then something moved inside the mist. At first he thought it was a fallen branch rolling through the floodwater. The shape rose unsteadily, crossed into the center of the road, and stopped directly in front of his truck. Nathan hit the brakes. The pickup slid several feet before the tires caught against the wet gravel. The shape did not move. It was a German shepherd. The dog stood in the headlights, with its head lowered and its legs trembling. It was male, perhaps 8 years old, though hardship made him appear older. His black and brown coat was soaked flat against a body so thin that every rib showed beneath the fur. His flanks were deeply hollowed, and mud clung to his belly, paws, and tail. Old scars covered him in pale, uneven lines. One long scar ran from his left shoulder toward his chest, while the upper edge of his right ear had been torn away. His left hind leg barely touched the ground. Fresh cuts marked his lower legs, and dark stains that might have been dried blood remained beneath the mud. He looked weak enough to collapse, but his amber eyes were sharp, fixed on Nathan with an awareness that did not belong to a frightened stray. Nathan stared through the windshield. The dog did not bark. He did not bare his teeth or approach the warmth of the engine. He simply stood there, breathing hard, rain running from his muzzle. "Move!" Nathan murmured, though he knew the animal could not hear him through the storm. The shepherd tilted his head slightly. Then he took 3 limping steps toward the driver's side of the truck. Nathan felt something tighten inside his chest. The movement was controlled, intentional. He had seen military working dogs signal handlers that way before. Approach, gain attention, reposition. It was not begging, it was communication. Nathan opened the door and stepped into the rain. Cold water struck his face immediately. His boots sank into mud at the road's edge as he lowered himself carefully, his right knee protesting. "Easy," he said. His voice was low and even, the same voice he had once used around frightened men. Injured soldiers and dogs trained to detect danger before humans could see it. "I'm not going to hurt you." The shepherd studied him. Nathan could see exhaustion in the dog's shaking muscles, but not panic. The animal had been taught discipline. More than that, he had chosen to hold himself together. Nathan extended one hand, palm down. The dog moved close enough to smell his fingers. His nose was cold. His breath came in shallow bursts. For one brief second, Nathan saw another dog in his place. A younger canine with alert ears, a dark muzzle, and complete trust in the man giving the command. The memory struck without warning. Rain against metal, radio static, a narrow entrance, and Nathan's own voice ordering the dog forward. Then an explosion. Then silence. Nathan withdrew his hand too quickly. The shepherd noticed. His ears shifted backward, not in fear but in recognition, as though he understood that the man in front of him carried wounds no one else could see. The dog turned away, but instead of fleeing into the forest, he walked exactly 7 paces toward the flooded ditch, stopped beneath a bent cedar tree, and looked back. Nathan remained still. The shepherd lifted his injured paw, struck the ground once, and waited. It was the same field signal Nathan's former canine had used years ago when he had found something hidden beyond his handler's line of sight. Nathan's pulse slowed, not from calm but from disbelief. No ordinary stray should have known that gesture. No injured animal should have spent its last strength performing it for a stranger. "You're leading me," Nathan said. The shepherd turned and began limping toward the trees. Nathan should have returned to his truck and called county rescue. The ridge was unstable, daylight was fading, and the water moving through the forest could become a flash flood without warning. He knew every reason not to follow. He also knew what happened when a trained dog asked for help and a human hesitated. Nathan reached into the truck, took his waterproof radio, flashlight, and compact medical pouch, then locked the door behind him. "Not far," he warned the animal. "You don't have enough left in you for far." The shepherd did not acknowledge him. He moved through the roadside brush with slow determination, favoring his wounded leg but refusing to stop. Nathan followed beneath dripping branches and across a slope covered in wet leaves. The air smelled of pine, mud, and exposed earth. Water flowed around his boots, sometimes ankle-deep, sometimes higher. Every few yards, the dog glanced back to make sure Nathan remained behind him. That detail unsettled Nathan more than the scars. A wild dog would have run. A desperate pet might have wandered. This one maintained visual contact like a trained partner responsible for a team. After roughly 50 yards, they entered a shallow depression protected by 2 large boulders. The shepherd stopped beside the exposed roots of an uprooted maple. He lowered his head and scraped weakly at a pile of leaves, but his front legs buckled. Nathan reached him before he struck the ground. The dog flinched at the first touch, then allowed Nathan to support his chest. Up close, the damage looked worse. Some scars were old and clean, the record of injuries survived years earlier. Others were recent, raw beneath the wet fur. His body was dangerously cold. "You should be looking for shelter," Nathan whispered. "Not dragging me through a flood." The shepherd pushed his nose toward the roots. Nathan shifted the leaves aside and found a black cylindrical object wedged beneath a broken branch. It was an emergency locator beacon, built for extreme weather, with a torn nylon strap and a cracked protective casing. Mud covered most of the lettering. Nathan wiped it clean with his sleeve. A metal identification plate was fixed to the side. The engraved name read, "Dr. Elena Vale." Nathan knew the name. Most people in Cedar Vale did. Dr. Elena Vale was a 43-year-old veterinarian and disaster animal rescue specialist who worked in the mountain communities after floods, fires, and landslides. She was known as a lean, strong woman with shoulder-length black hair, dark brown eyes, and a small scar near her left temple. She was patient with wounded animals, stubborn with officials, and openly hostile toward anyone who treated a working dog as disposable equipment. 2 days earlier, she had gone to inspect a failed flood warning station near Blackstone Ridge. She had not returned. The county had blamed the missing signal on the storm and advised people to stay away until conditions improved. Nathan looked at the shepherd. "You're hers." The dog raised his head at the sound of Elena's name. His amber eyes sharpened. That was confirmation enough. Nathan examined the beacon. The battery indicator was almost dead. The outer strap had been torn, but the inner lining held several words written in faded waterproof ink. He moved beneath the nearest tree and angled his flashlight toward them. The handwriting was uneven, likely made by someone cold or injured. "Ranger knows the way. Trust him." Nathan read the line twice. Ranger. The name suited the dog, not because he looked strong now, but because something inside him had refused to surrender. Ranger tried to stand. His legs shook so badly Nathan thought he would fall again. Yet the dog turned toward the deeper forest, facing the hidden slopes of Blackstone Ridge. There was no confusion in him. Elena was still out there, and Ranger intended to return to her. Nathan felt the old pressure building behind his ribs, the same weight that had followed him home from war. He had promised himself he would never again accept responsibility for a working dog, never again give an order that might send one into danger. But Ranger was not waiting for an order. He had already entered the danger, survived it, and come back alone because Elena could not. Nathan keyed his radio. Static answered first, then a weak county frequency broke through. Cedar Rescue, this is Nathan Rourke on Millstone Road below Blackstone Ridge. I have located Dr. Elena Vale's emergency beacon. He paused and looked at the scarred shepherd standing in the rain. Her K9 found me. The dog is injured, but he is actively leading toward her position. The dispatcher's voice came faintly through the storm, asking him to remain where he was until a rescue team arrived. Nathan looked uphill. The sky beyond the trees had darkened, and somewhere in the distance a low rumble rolled across the ridge. It was not thunder, it was earth moving. Ranger took one step into the forest, then stopped and looked back. Nathan remembered the message on the strap, "Trust him." He clipped the beacon to his jacket, tightened the medical pouch around his waist, and moved beside the dog. "All right, Ranger," he said quietly, I'm with you." Then the retired Navy SEAL and the scarred German shepherd disappeared together into the rain. Rain moved through the forest in silver sheets as Nathan Rourke followed Ranger deeper into Blackstone Ridge. The ground rose sharply beyond the roadside hollow, forcing Nathan to lean forward and place each boot with care. Mud slid beneath the leaves, and small streams had formed where trails once ran. Ranger stayed several yards ahead, his thin body weaving between roots and broken branches with a focus that seemed impossible for an animal so close to collapse. Every few steps, the German shepherd paused to listen, his torn right ear tilted toward sounds Nathan could barely separate from the storm. Rushing water, cracking timber, the distant shifting of saturated earth. Nathan had worked with K9s in deserts, mountains, and ruined cities, but he had never seen one ration its strength so deliberately. Ranger was not simply following a scent. He was calculating how much life he had left and spending only what Elena needed. Nathan raised his waterproof radio again. "Cedar Rescue Rourke. I'm moving northeast from Millstone Road with the K9. Visibility under 30 yards. Ground unstable." Static answered, followed by a clipped female voice. "Rourke, hold position if possible. Team is approaching from the south axis." The speaker was Chief Mara Holt, though Nathan had not heard her voice in years. Mara was 46, tall and broad-shouldered, with short ash-blonde hair, a square weathered face, and a narrow scar beneath her chin from a rockfall rescue 18 years earlier. She had built her reputation by distrusting panic, shortcuts, and heroic improvisation. People sometimes mistook her bluntness for coldness, but Nathan knew she remembered the name of every person her team had failed to bring home. "Holding isn't possible," Nathan replied. "The dog has a live trail and the ridge is moving." There was a pause. "That is not your call anymore, Senior Chief." "It is if Elena is below the next slide." Mara exhaled through the radio. "Then mark your path. We'll close the distance." Nathan clipped the radio back to his jacket. Ranger looked over his shoulder as though waiting for the argument to end, then resumed climbing. They crossed a narrow drainage channel where brown water surged around exposed stones. Ranger stepped onto a fallen log but slipped halfway across. Nathan lunged forward, caught the loose skin behind his shoulders, and hauled him back before the current could take him. Ranger twisted once in alarm, then went still when he recognized the grip was support rather than restraint. Nathan lowered him onto the opposite bank. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. Ranger met his eyes and continued walking. The response was so familiar that Nathan almost laughed. Every working dog he had respected had ignored the same sentence. 20 minutes later, movement appeared through the mist behind them. Mara Holt emerged first in a yellow rescue shell darkened by rain, carrying a coil of rope across one shoulder. Behind her came Michael Torres, Elena's younger brother. Mike was 34, about 5 feet 10, lean rather than muscular, with short black hair plastered to his forehead and a thin beard outlining a face made older by sleeplessness. His brown eyes moved constantly across the trees and water, searching for danger before it arrived. A faded navy raincoat covered his clothes, and an old emergency medical pack rested against his back. 4 years earlier, Mike's wife Hannah and their Labrador, Scout, had died in a flash flood while he was working another call across the county. He had left emergency response afterward, abandoned his nursing studies, and taken a quiet job managing Cedar Vale's outdoor supply store. Since then, he had treated every heavy rain as if it carried an accusation. "Where is she?" Mike asked before reaching them. "We don't know yet," Nathan said. "Ranger does." Mike looked at the shepherd and stopped. His face tightened at the sight of the exposed ribs, scarred body, and shaking leg. "That's Elena's dog?" "Yes. She said he was retired." "He doesn't appear to understand the word." Mara crouched beside Ranger without touching him. Her pale gray eyes examined his paws, breathing, and posture. "He won't make another mile." Ranger turned away from her and pressed his nose to the ground. Mara stood. Apparently he disagrees. She distributed lightweight safety lines and ordered Mike to remain between her and Nathan. Mike resisted. "I know these slopes." "You knew them 4 years ago," Mara said. "Today they're water and bad decisions. Stay in line." He looked as if he might argue, but the mention of the old flood had struck where Mara intended. He clipped himself to the rope. They followed Ranger along a narrow shelf above a swollen creek. The shepherd stopped beneath a cluster of mountain laurels and began pawing at a tangle of debris. Nathan and Mara pulled away branches until they uncovered a red rescue harness with one side torn completely through. Elena's initials were stitched near the buckle. Mike picked it up with both hands. "She never removed this in the field." Mara examined the frayed webbing. "It didn't fail from where? Something pulled hard enough to rip it." Nathan looked uphill. A line of broken brush descended from the ridge, ending near the creek. Elena had either fallen or been carried by moving earth. Ranger sniffed the harness, then released a soft sound from deep in his chest. It was not a whine. It was closer to grief held under control. When Mike turned the harness over, a small brass whistle dropped into the mud. Ranger froze. He stared at it without blinking, then lowered himself until his chest touched the ground. Mike wiped the whistle clean and raised it to his lips, but Nathan caught his wrist. "Don't." Mike frowned. "Elena used this to call him, that's why." Nathan pointed to Ranger. The dog's body had gone rigid, his eyes fixed not on the whistle, but on a dark ravine ahead. Whatever memory that sound carried, Ranger was afraid of hearing it, and still prepared to walk toward the place it came from. Mike closed his fist around the whistle. "What happened to him?" "Something involving that signal," Nathan said. "Ask Elena when we find her." Ranger rose and moved toward the ravine. The group followed, now more slowly. The slope descended into a corridor where the storms had stripped bark from trees and buried the ground beneath wet stone. Halfway down, Ranger stopped again beside a torn section of orange fabric caught on a thorn branch. Elena's rescue jacket. 10 feet farther on, they found her backpack wedged beneath a log. Mara cut it free while Nathan kept watch on the slope. Inside were a broken satellite phone, 2 empty water pouches, veterinary supplies, and a laminated terrain map. One corner had been marked in black pencil with a rough circle around an abandoned fire lookout. Mike leaned over the map. "Blackstone Watch Station. It's been closed for 12 years. Still has a roof," Mara said. "If she could move, she'd head there." Nathan studied the contour lines. The direct trail crosses Hollow Creek. Mara looked toward the roar rising from below. "There is no Hollow Creek anymore." "That's a river." Ranger pushed his muzzle against the eastern edge of the map, then stepped toward a line of dense trees above the ravine. Mara watched him. "That route isn't marked. It may be an old service path," Nathan said, "or nothing." "He found the beacon, the harness, and the pack," Mike replied. "I'm following him." Mara folded the map. "We all are." "That doesn't mean we stop thinking." A deep crack rolled across the ridge. Nathan looked up just as the ground above them shifted. "Move!" A wall of mud, loose rock and branches broke from the slope. Mara drove Mike behind a boulder while Nathan grabbed Ranger around the chest and threw himself into the shallow shelter of an uprooted tree. Debris thundered past. Mud struck Nathan's back and helmetless head, filling his ears with a dull roar. Ranger struggled beneath him, not trying to escape but twisting toward Mike and Mara. Then the slide passed, leaving only rain and the sound of stones settling. Nathan rose slowly. His knee burned, but it held. Mara emerged from behind the boulder with blood running from a scrape near her temple. Mike was pale but unhurt. "Everyone intact," she called. Nathan nodded. Ranger broke free and ran, not downhill toward safety, but across the fresh mud toward a half-buried cedar. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Nathan followed and saw why. Beneath the cedar roots was a narrow strip of compacted stone almost hidden under the slide, an old maintenance path. It climbed east above the flooded creek. Ranger had not panicked during the landslide. He had been searching for the route Elena must have taken. They moved quickly before the slope could shift again. The path led them through dense timber and finally onto a narrow rise overlooking the valley. Through the rain, Nathan saw the dark outline of the abandoned fire lookout nearly 2 miles away. Between them and the structure lay a broad reservoir basin, its water already spilling over the lower access road. Mara opened the terrain map and went still. "The station isn't on high ground," she said. "Not anymore." Mike stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Mara pointed to the old contour marks and then to the swollen basin below. "The reservoir overflow is cutting directly toward it." Ranger stood at the edge of the rise, staring at the distant building. His body trembled from exhaustion, but his tail lifted once. Elena was there. Nathan could feel the certainty in him. Then, from somewhere beyond the flooded valley, a faint metallic sound carried through the rain, 3 slow strikes, a pause, then 3 more. Mike's face drained of color. "That's her emergency pattern." Mara looked at the water rising around the watch station. "Then we have less time than I thought." Ranger stepped forward. Nathan tightened the rope around his waist and followed. The first section of the descent vanished beneath waist-deep water. Nathan Rourke stood at the edge of the flooded basin, studying the current as it tore branches from the shoreline and dragged them toward the abandoned Blackstone watch station. The old structure rose from a low shelf of land nearly 200 yards away, its timber walls dark with rain and its lower steps already submerged. Every few seconds, a loose sheet of metal struck somewhere inside the building. 3 blows, a pause, then 3 more. Elena was alive, but the water was climbing faster than the rescue team could move. Chief Mara Holt checked the line secured around her waist, her square face tightened by calculation rather than fear. Rain streamed from the edge of her short ash-blonde hair and followed the scar beneath her chin. "The access bridge is gone," she said. "The current is too strong for a direct crossing." Mike Torres stared at the distant station. His lean frame looked smaller beneath his soaked navy raincoat, but his hands were already opening the medical pack. He had gone pale at the sight of the flood, and Nathan noticed the way his breathing shortened whenever debris struck the water. 4 years had passed since Mike lost Hannah and Scout, yet part of him still stood helpless beside another rising river. "There has to be another way," Mike said. Ranger moved before anyone answered. The 8-year-old German shepherd stepped down the muddy bank, sniffed the water and lifted his head toward a line of drowned fence posts angling north. His body shook from cold and exhaustion. The old scars across his ribs appeared almost white beneath the soaked black and brown coat, and his injured left hind leg barely supported him. Still, his amber eyes remained fixed on the station. Nathan caught the loose skin above Ranger's shoulders before the dog entered the current. Not alone. Ranger turned his head and looked at him with quiet impatience. Mara followed the line of fence posts with her eyes. That used to mark the service road. The roadbed may still be raised under the water. She took a collapsible probe from her pack and tested the depth. The first few yards reached only to her thighs. Beyond that, the current deepened. "We anchor here, cross in a triangle and keep the line high. Mike stays in the middle. I can handle myself," Mike said. Mara met his gaze. "Then handle yourself by following instructions." Nathan tied the main rope around a cedar trunk while Mara fixed a secondary line across their chests. Ranger resisted when Nathan clipped a rescue sling around him. But the dog lacked enough strength to fight for long. "You lead," Nathan told him. "We keep you above water." Ranger entered first. His paws found the buried roadbed and the 3 humans followed in a staggered line. Cold water climbed to Nathan's hips, then his ribs. The current pressed hard against his right knee, awakening the old injury until pain traveled from his thigh to his spine. He ignored it. Mara used the probe to find each next step. Mike moved between them, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on Ranger's tail. Halfway across, a floating log struck the rope and drove Mike sideways. He disappeared beneath the brown water. Nathan grabbed his shoulder strap while Mara leaned against the line with her full weight. They pulled Mike up coughing. He thrashed once, not from the current but from memory. "Mike!" Nathan shouted. "Look at me." Mike's eyes were wide and unfocused. "I couldn't reach her," he gasped. "Hannah was right there and I couldn't." Ranger turned against the sling, forcing his scarred muzzle into Mike's chest. The dog held himself there despite the water battering his body. Mike stared down. Ranger's amber eyes did not plead or command. They simply remained present. Mike pressed one shaking hand against the torn edge of the dog's ear. His breathing slowed. "I'm here," he whispered, though Nathan could not tell whether he was speaking to Ranger, Hannah, or himself. They continued. The raised roadway ended 30 yards from the station. Water swirled between them and the steps, hiding a deeper channel cut by the overflowing reservoir. Mara threw a weighted line toward the porch railing, but it fell short. Nathan gathered it for another attempt. Ranger suddenly began twisting in the sling. His ears rose, and a weak bark escaped him, the first Nathan had heard since the landslide. The dog turned toward a partially submerged pine on their left. Its trunk lay diagonally across the hidden channel, one end trapped beneath rocks and the other resting against the station's foundation. "He sees a bridge," Mike said. "Or smells one," Mara replied. They edged toward the trunk. The bark was slick and flexed beneath the current, but it offered the only route above the deepest water. Mara crossed first on hands and knees, secured the line to the porch, and signaled them forward. Mike followed with the medical bag held against his chest. Nathan lifted Ranger over the trunk, taking most of the dog's weight while his knee trembled under them both. When they reached the porch, Ranger collapsed. His chest rose twice, shallow and rapid. Nathan knelt beside him. "Stay with me." Ranger tried to stand but could not. From inside the station came the faint sound of the brass whistle, one weak note, broken by a cough. Ranger's head lifted instantly. Fear crossed his face before duty replaced it. He dragged himself toward the door on his front legs, leaving his injured hindquarters behind. Nathan understood then that the whistle was not only tied to whatever had wounded Ranger in the past. Elena had used the same sound to call him back from it. The thing he feared most had also become the voice he refused to abandon. Nathan slid one arm beneath Ranger's chest and carried him through the doorway. The station's single room smelled of wet timber, rust, and cold ash. Rain entered through a broken window. Water had already spread across the floorboards. Dr. Elena Vale lay against the far wall beneath an emergency blanket, one hand wrapped around a bent metal cup she had been striking against the stove. At 43, Elena was usually lean, strong and composed, with shoulder-length black hair, a sun-browned oval face, and dark brown eyes that made people feel examined rather than judged. Now her hair was tangled across her cheeks. Her skin gray from cold, and a thin line of blood had dried beside the small scar near her left temple. Her orange rescue jacket had been torn open at the shoulder. One leg was trapped beneath a collapsed roof beam and twisted at an unnatural angle. A crude splint of wood and webbing held the lower leg still. When she saw Ranger, the cup slipped from her fingers. "No," she whispered. "I sent you away." Ranger struggled from Nathan's arms and crawled the final few feet. He placed his head against Elena's chest. She buried one hand in his wet fur and closed her eyes. "You stubborn old man?" Mike dropped beside her. For a second he looked like a frightened younger brother, not a trained responder. Then his old discipline returned. He checked Elena's airway, pulse and pupils, his movements quick but careful. Core temperature is low, pulse weak, possible fracture below the knee, maybe pelvic involvement. Elena opened her eyes. "Mike, I'm here. You hate floods. I'm making an exception." The corner of her mouth moved almost a smile. Mara examined the beam. "We need leverage and a clean lift. Water will reach the floor supports soon." Nathan found an iron fire poker and a length of timber. Together, he and Mara built a lever while Mike stabilized Elena's neck and leg. "On 3, Mara said. They raised the beam just enough for Mike to pull Elena free. She cried out once, a raw sound she immediately tried to swallow. Nathan had heard soldiers do the same, ashamed of pain they had no reason to hide. "Let it out," he told her. "You're alive. That's enough." Mike cut away the ruined splint and rebuilt it using padded boards from his pack. He covered Elena in thermal layers, placed heat packs beneath her arms, and checked the wound at her shoulder. "You lost blood, but not enough to explain this pulse." Elena looked toward Ranger, gave him the last food yesterday. Water, too. Nathan glanced at the dog. "He crossed the ridge after that. I told him to take the beacon and find the road." Her fingers tightened around Ranger's neck. "He wouldn't leave until the water came through the wall." A deep groan rolled beneath the station. The floor tilted. Mara keyed her radio. "Cedar Air Blackstone team. 1 live patient, severe hypothermia and lower leg trauma. Structure failing. Request immediate hoist." A new voice answered through the static. "Blackstone team, this is Flight Medic Aisha Grant. We have your signal, but cloud cover prevents landing. We can attempt cable extraction through the tree gap." Aisha Grant was 31, a compact, athletic flight medic with dark skin, tightly braided hair beneath her helmet, and a calm manner sharpened by 6 years of mountain evacuations. She was known for speaking gently even when everyone around her was shouting. The rotor noise grew louder outside. Mara and Nathan moved Elena onto the soft rescue litter while Mike secured every strap twice. The station shifted again, and water burst through a gap near the stove. Ranger stood beside Elena, swaying. Nathan tried to lead him away, but the dog planted his paws. "He goes with her," Elena said. "The aircraft may not take both in one lift," Mara replied. "Then take him first." "No," Nathan said. "Elena first. I'll carry Ranger out." Aisha descended through the opening in the trees, boots striking the porch as the cable swung. Her red and black flight suit was soaked immediately. She entered, assessed Elena, and nodded once. "We move now." They carried the litter outside. The porch railing tore loose as the current struck the building, and the entire station groaned behind them. Aisha attached the hoist. Elena reached down until her fingers found Ranger's scarred face. "You did it," she said. "Now stay." The cable lifted her into the rain. Ranger watched until she disappeared beneath the helicopter. Then his legs folded. Nathan caught him before he struck the boards. The station's rear wall collapsed with a crash, sending water and splintered timber across the porch. Mara and Mike clipped onto the return line. Nathan lifted Ranger against his chest. The German Shepherd felt frighteningly light, little more than wet fur, bone, and stubbornness. "I've got you," Nathan said. For years, those words had belonged to a dog he could not save. This time, he would make them true. They crossed back over the submerged pine as the watch station broke apart behind them. By the time they reached higher ground, the helicopter had turned towards Cedar Vale with Elena aboard. Ranger opened his eyes once, found the empty sky, and released a low breath. Nathan knelt in the mud, wrapping the dog in his canvas jacket. "Mission complete, warrior," he whispered. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." Through the rain below, headlights appeared along the emergency access road. One vehicle carried the county veterinary team. The other was a spotless black federal transport van marked with the insignia of the National K-9 Response Program. Mara stared at it, her expression hardening. They came fast. Nathan looked down at Ranger, unconscious in his arms. The dog had survived the flood and saved Elena. Now the people who once discarded him had returned to claim him. By dawn, the rain had weakened to a cold drizzle over Cedar Vale, but Nathan Rourke still felt the storm inside him. Ranger lay unconscious beneath heated blankets in the emergency wing of Cedar Vale Animal Recovery Center, his scarred body almost disappearing beneath the folds. Intravenous fluids ran into one front leg, and warmed air moved through a clear oxygen hood positioned around his head. The old German Shepherd's ribs rose slowly, each breath shallow but steady. Nathan sat beside the treatment table in his wet flannel shirt, elbows resting on his knees, his faded canvas jacket wrapped around Ranger instead of himself. He had not left since carrying the dog out of Blackstone Ridge. Across the room, Dr. Samuel Reed studied the monitors without speaking. Samuel was 58, tall and thin, with nearly white hair combed back from a narrow forehead and wire-framed glasses that magnified calm gray eyes. His face was gentle but restrained, as if years of treating frightened animals had taught him that concern was most useful when controlled. A gray wool sweater showed beneath his white coat. He moved carefully, never reaching for an animal before allowing it to notice him. "His temperature is improving," Samuel said. "Dehydration is severe. There's infection around the left hind leg, but no fresh fracture. Most of those scars are old." Nathan looked at the pale lines crossing Ranger's shoulders and ribs. He earned everyone. Or someone made him earn them. The words settled heavily between them. The door opened before Nathan could answer. Captain Victoria Sloan entered with 2 federal handlers behind her. At 39, Victoria was tall and rigidly composed, with dark blonde hair twisted into a precise bun, pale blue eyes, and a posture so straight it seemed, reinforced by steel. Her Navy field uniform was immaculate despite the mud outside, and a black tablet rested beneath one arm. She was not cruel in the obvious way. She did not raise her voice or display anger. Her coldness came from believing that rules became dangerous only when people allowed emotion to bend them. "Nathan Rourke," she said. "Captain Victoria Sloan, National K-9 Response Program." Nathan did not stand. "I recognized the van." Her gaze shifted to Ranger. For half a second, something human moved across her face, surprise, perhaps even regret, before policy returned. Rishadri confirmed the dog as K-9 Ranger, federal identification R4 and teen. He was assigned to the Mountain Disaster Response Division and listed as unrecovered after a training incident 3 years ago. He was discarded, Nathan said. He was presumed dead. There is a legal distinction. Not to him. Victoria activated her tablet. The program funded his breeding, training, and operational care. Until formal release is documented, he remains federal property. Samuel looked up from the monitor. He is not medically stable for transport. Then transport will occur when he is. Nathan rose slowly. At 50, he no longer needed to make threats to appear dangerous. His broad shoulders, weathered angular face, and quiet blue-gray eyes carried the controlled authority of someone who had spent decades deciding which dangers required force and which required patience. You are not taking him. Victoria met his gaze without stepping back. Your service record is not authority here. No. What he did on that mountain is. The door opened again, and Elena Vale entered in a wheelchair pushed by Mike. Her right leg was encased in a rigid brace from thigh to ankle, and one shoulder rested in a sling beneath a loose hospital sweater. Her shoulder-length black hair had been washed but remained uneven around her sun-browned face. Exhaustion hollowed her dark eyes, yet the stubbornness Nathan had heard about was fully awake. Mike stood behind her in dry clothes, his lean face still marked by bruising from the flood. Ranger belongs with me, Elena said. Victoria turned. Doctor. Vale, the transfer agreement in your file was temporary rehabilitation custody, because your program refused permanent release, because he was a trained federal asset. Elena's jaw tightened. He was a traumatized animal who stopped obeying handlers after they nearly killed him. Samuel glanced toward Ranger. That requires explanation. Elena looked at the brass whistle resting on the counter, recovered from her harness. 3 years ago, Ranger was deployed after a landslide at Red Basin. The team commander used whistle recall because radio signals were failing. Ranger located 2 trapped responders inside an unstable drainage tunnel. He refused the recall because one man was still alive. Victoria's eyes narrowed. The official report stated command failure. The official report protected the commander, Elena replied. He kept blowing that whistle while ordering Ranger back through falling debris. Ranger returned only after dragging the survivor out. Then the tunnel collapsed behind him. He was cut open from shoulder to chest and buried long enough that everyone assumed he was dead. Nathan looked at the long scar across Ranger's body. The whistle had not represented obedience. It had represented the moment people demanded he abandon someone still alive. When they recovered him, Elena continued, he panicked whenever handlers used forced recall. They labeled him unstable. I called him injured. Victoria's expression remained controlled, but she lowered the tablet slightly. That does not erase ownership. No, Nathan said. It proves why you shouldn't have it. Ranger's monitor suddenly accelerated. His eyes opened beneath the oxygen hood, unfocused at first, then fixed on the whistle. Samuel reached for the sedative line, but Elena shook her head. Wait. Ranger tried to rise. His legs failed, yet he dragged one front paw toward the sound. Mike stepped closer, and the dog's gaze shifted to him. Mike's breathing had begun to shorten again, triggered by the monitor alarm and the enclosed room. Ranger could barely lift his own head, but he pressed his paw against Mike's wrist. The man froze. Then he covered the scarred paw with both hands and slowly matched his breathing to the dog's. Ranger had awakened in pain, surrounded by strangers and the symbol of his worst memory. And his first instinct was still to steady someone else. Samuel watched in silence until Ranger's pulse began to fall. That, he said, is not standard search behavior. Victoria looked at the monitor. Conditioned response. No command was given, Samuel replied. And he selected the person in distress. Elena leaned back in the wheelchair. That's what I've been trying to tell people. Ranger doesn't just track bodies. He reads fear. Over the next 4 days, Samuel documented the behavior repeatedly. Ranger refused food when isolated, but ate when Nathan sat nearby. He remained tense around uniformed handlers, yet relaxed when Mike read aloud from an old emergency medicine manual. When a volunteer dropped a metal tray, Ranger startled but recovered without aggression. Most strikingly, he alerted before Mike's panic symptoms became visible, nudging his hand and placing his body against the man's legs. Victoria stayed in Cedar Vale, reviewing reports and waiting for medical clearance. She treated every observation as data, but Nathan noticed she had stopped calling Ranger the asset. On the 5th morning, Samuel proposed an independent behavioral evaluation. No whistles, no commands, no leash pressure, he said. We allow him to choose between 2 environments. Victoria crossed her arms. A dog cannot make a legal decision. Perhaps not, Samuel answered. But his behavior can clarify what kind of work will harm him and what kind he seeks voluntarily. The test took place behind the recovery center. One path led toward a wooded training field where scent canisters and search obstacles had been arranged. The other led into a quiet courtyard used by children recovering from injury. Nathan stood near the gate with Elena, who remained in her wheelchair, while Mike waited beside Samuel. Victoria observed with her tablet lowered at her side. Among the children sat Lucas Kim, an 11-year-old boy who had lost his lower right leg in a school bus accident. Lucas was small for his age, with straight black hair falling over a pale, serious face and dark eyes that hardened whenever adults spoke to him too gently. A carbon fiber prosthetic extended beneath his shorts. He disliked encouragement, refused pity, and had spent months avoiding the therapy dogs his mother suggested. "I'm not petting him," Lucas announced. "No one asked you to," Nathan said. Samuel opened Ranger's gate. The shepherd stepped out wearing only a soft green collar. He was still painfully thin, his coat clipped around treated wounds and his left hind leg wrapped, but his amber eyes were clear. He paused where the paths divided. The woods carried familiar scents, wet bark, hidden targets, open ground. His ears turned toward them. Victoria watched closely. Ranger took 2 steps toward the training field. Elena's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. Then Lucas shifted his prosthetic and winced. The movement was small enough that most people missed it. Ranger did not. He turned away from the woods and walked into the courtyard. The children grew quiet. Lucas stiffened as the scarred dog approached. Ranger did not sniff his face or demand contact. He circled once, lowered himself beside the prosthetic leg and rested his head on the ground. His body formed a barrier between Lucas and everyone watching. "Why me?" Lucas asked. Nathan answered softly. "Maybe because he knows what it is to hurt and hate being treated like you're broken." Lucas stared at the long scar running down Ranger's shoulder. Slowly, he placed 2 fingers against the torn edge of the dog's ear. Ranger closed his eyes. Samuel turned to Victoria. He chose. Victoria looked from the forest path to the boy and the dog. "One test does not settle federal custody." Nathan stepped beside her. "No, but it settles what he was trying to tell us." By evening, Victoria had delayed the transport order pending formal review. It was not surrender, only time. Yet, for the first time, Ranger slept without facing the door. He lay beside Luca's empty chair in the courtyard, while Nathan watched from the window. The dog had made his choice. The only question left was whether the law would allow anyone to honor it. For 9 days, Cedar Vale argued over the future of Ranger. The debate moved from the recovery center to the county offices, then into the local newspaper, and finally onto the front steps of Town Hall, where farmers, teachers, veterans, and rescue volunteers stood beneath umbrellas holding handwritten signs that read, "Let him choose and a hero is not property." Nathan Rourke avoided the cameras. He remained beside Ranger instead, walking the scarred German shepherd slowly through the rehabilitation courtyard each morning. Ranger was gaining weight, though his ribs still showed beneath the black and brown coat. The infection in his left hind leg had begun to clear, and the wounds around his shoulder were closing beneath clipped fur. He still moved with a limp. Some mornings he tired after only a few minutes, yet he continued to watch every doorway, every child, and every change in breathing around him. Nathan understood that vigilance. It was difficult to stop standing guard after survival had become part of the body. Captain Victoria Sloan had delayed the federal transfer but not withdrawn it. Her final review cited Ranger's exceptional tracking ability, the government's financial investment, and the absence of a signed permanent release. Elena Vale answered with medical records documenting trauma, behavioral reports from Samuel Reed, and testimony about the Red Basin incident. Chief Mara Holt submitted her own field report stating that Ranger had saved Elena, identified a stable route during a landslide, and prevented Mike from losing control in floodwater. Mike added a statement he rewrote 6 times before signing. He did not call Ranger a miracle. He described measurable behavior, how the dog noticed changes in breath, posture, and attention before trained humans did. Nathan contributed only 1 page. It ended with a sentence Victoria read twice. "A service record may prove what Ranger was trained to do, but his choices prove who he is." On the 10th morning, Victoria arrived without handlers. Her dark blonde hair remained pinned into its precise bun, but the Navy uniform had been replaced by a charcoal coat and plain boots. She carried a thin folder instead of her tablet. "The program has agreed to conditional retirement," she said. Elena sat in her wheelchair near the courtyard window, her braced leg extended before her. Her sun-browned face still showed the fatigue of recovery, but her dark eyes sharpened instantly. "Command how? Ranger will be permanently released from federal operational service. Custody transfers to a registered therapeutic organization once one exists. Until then, Dr. Vale remains his legal guardian." Nathan watched Victoria closely. "And the price? Quarterly health and welfare reports for 2 years. No commercial breeding. No return to high-risk field deployment." "He was never going back," Elena said. Victoria's expression softened by almost nothing. "I know that now." She placed the folder on the table. Beneath the signed release was a copy of the Red Basin report, with several lines newly declassified. The commander who had ordered the repeated whistle recall had concealed the presence of a final survivor to justify withdrawing the team. Ranger's refusal had saved that man's life. The official finding now acknowledged handler misconduct. "It does not repair what happened," Victoria said, "but the record will no longer call him unstable." Nathan looked through the glass at Ranger sleeping beside Lucas Kim's chair. "Records matter to people," he said. He already knew the truth. Victoria nodded once and left before anyone could thank her. The legal victory solved only one problem. Ranger now had freedom. But freedom alone was not a purpose. Nathan proposed the answer at a crowded town meeting. He stood before a whiteboard in the Cedar Vale Community Hall, uncomfortable beneath the attention of nearly 100 people. "We build a program," he said, "not around one dog, but around what he showed us." He outlined a network pairing retired or traumatized working dogs with children, veterans, and disaster survivors. Samuel would oversee animal welfare. Elena would manage training and placement. Mara would connect the program with county rescue services. Mike, who had quietly reapplied to nursing school, would coordinate emergency health support. Lucas sat in the front row beside Ranger, one hand resting near the torn edge of the dog's ear. When Nathan asked for a name, Lucas answered before anyone else. "The Ranger Bridge." The room fell still. "Because he gets people from one side to the other," the boy explained, "even when they think they're stuck." The vote was unanimous. The first person Ranger failed to approach was an 8-year-old girl named Emma Reyes. She was small, with brown curls touching the shoulders of a purple coat and a faded stuffed dog held tightly beneath one arm. More than a year earlier, Emma had survived the house fire that killed her mother. Since that night, she had spoken only in sleep. Her father, Daniel Reyes, was a 38-year-old electrician, with a narrow build, tired hazel eyes, and dark hair already graying at the temples. Grief had made him careful with every word, as though one wrong sentence might cause his daughter to disappear further inside herself. Ranger watched Emma from across the therapy room, then turned away and lay down near the door. Daniel's face fell, but Nathan noticed the dog's position. Ranger was not rejecting her. He had placed himself between Emma and the exit, not blocking it, only guarding it. He was telling her she could leave whenever she wished, and that nothing would follow her into danger. For 3 sessions, Ranger did not approach. Emma sat on the floor with her stuffed dog, while he rested 10 feet away. He never stared directly at her. He matched her stillness. On the 4th session, Emma placed the stuffed animal between them. Ranger crawled forward only far enough to rest his chin beside it. On the 6th, she reached out and touched the torn section of his right ear. Her fingers followed the edge of the old scar. Ranger did not move. Emma's lips parted. "Hurt," she whispered. Daniel covered his mouth. Samuel lowered his clipboard. Elena closed her eyes as tears gathered beneath them. Ranger simply leaned slightly into Emma's hand, accepting the word without asking for another. It was the first thing she had said while awake in 14 months. News of Emma's progress spread through Cedar Vale, but Nathan refused to let the story become spectacle. The Ranger Bridge held a modest fundraiser at the middle school gymnasium. Local carpenters donated benches. Artists sold paintings and rescue crews offered training demonstrations. Mara arrived in uniform but spent most of the evening stacking chairs. Mike stood near the enrollment table with a nursing school acceptance letter folded inside his pocket. Elena walked several steps using crutches, refusing the wheelchair until Samuel ordered her to sit. Lucas designed the program logo, a scarred shepherd crossing a narrow bridge beside a child. Daniel volunteered to repair the electrical wiring in the old rehabilitation annex the town had donated. By the end of the evening, The total exceeded the amount needed to renovate the building. Nathan stood at the back of the room while Ranger lay among children on a green blanket. He had spent years believing purpose ended when service did. Watching the dog, he understood that service could change shape without losing meaning. 8 months later, spring returned to Blackstone Ridge. The rains had softened. New leaves covered the mountains and sunlight reached the valley where floodwater once stood. The renovated building opened under its official name, Ranger Bridge Center for Trauma Recovery. Warm cedar siding replaced the damaged exterior. Wide windows overlooked a gentle walking trail, and every room had quiet corners where animals could rest without being crowded. A carved wooden plaque near the entrance carried Luca's words. "He gets people from one side to the other." Nathan wore his dark blue flannel shirt and faded canvas jacket, standing slightly apart from the gathered crowd. His right knee still ached, but the emptiness he had carried since losing his military K-9 no longer controlled the way he moved through the world. Elena stood beside him without crutches, though a faint limp remained. Mike wore a student nurse identification badge. Mara held the ribbon steady. Samuel watched Ranger more closely than the ceremony, as he always did. Victoria Sloan stood near the rear in civilian clothes, saying nothing but remaining until the end. Emma approached Ranger before the ribbon was cut. She was now 9 and still carried the stuffed dog, though no longer pressed tightly to her chest. Ranger wore a green therapy vest over his scarred body. He was healthier, his coat fuller and his steps steadier, but age and injury remained visible. No one had tried to hide them. Emma knelt and placed both hands on his head. Ranger closed his amber eyes. "Home," she said clearly. Daniel began to cry without turning away. The scissors closed, the ribbon fell, and the crowd applauded. Ranger did not react to the noise. He stayed with Emma until she stood. That afternoon, Nathan, Elena, and Mike followed Ranger along the path behind the center. It ended beneath an old cedar overlooking the distant ridge. Ranger stopped there and faced the mountains. Once he had emerged from those forests starved, injured and carrying a message no human had heard. Now children's laughter drifted from the open windows behind him. Nathan rested one hand against the scarred shoulder. "You found her," he said. "Then you found all of us." Ranger looked back toward the building, where Lucas waited near the doorway, and Emma waved from beside her father. He turned away from the ridge and walked home. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder, bright lights, or answers that immediately make sense. Sometimes they come quietly, through a scarred dog standing in the rain, through a stranger who chooses to stop, or through one small act of courage when giving up would have been easier. Ranger entered Nathan's life weak, wounded, and nearly out of strength. Yet even with a body covered in scars, he still had enough love to lead others toward safety. Perhaps that is one of the ways God works in our lives. He can use what appears broken, forgotten, or unworthy to carry out a purpose far greater than anyone imagined. In everyday life, we may not be asked to cross a flooded mountain or rescue someone from a collapsing station. But we are often given quieter opportunities to help. It may be listening to someone who feels alone, forgiving a person who has hurt us, offering kindness without expecting anything in return, or simply staying beside someone during the hardest moment of their life. Your scars do not mean your story is over. Your pain may one day become the bridge that helps another person find hope. And even when you cannot see the road ahead, trust that God may still be guiding your steps, placing the right people, and sometimes the right animals, along your path at exactly the right time. If Ranger's story touched your heart, please share this video with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us, do you believe God sometimes sends miracles in unexpected forms? Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about courage, loyalty, healing, and second chances. May God protect you, strengthen you through every storm, guide you when the road is unclear, and bless you and your family wherever you are watching from.